Alan, are you good to go?
Yeah, I was just trying to adjust lighting. I got mixed light in here, and I think I'm as good as I'm going to get. So, you're a little sun now.
I've just had to back up. I've had to back away from the middle of the room because my head was shining like a lamp. So
Yeah,
what are you going to do? What are you
yeah.
going to do? Who's joined you on the call, Alan? Who's the
This
little
is
furry creature in the
this is
corner?
Callie. She's my mother-in-law's cat, but she's my office cat now.
Oh,
So.
very nice. Office cat. Okay, so listen, I'm going to kick off. Hello and welcome to Will Sutton, Alan Murdoch. Thank you both very much for joining me. We're going to talk about pip decks, storyteller tactics, how you use them, and what advice you'd give to someone who's thinking of buying or has bought the deck of cards. But let's just find out, first of all, a little bit about you. So, what it is you do, where you work, and what made you want to pick up Storyteller Tactics when you saw the adverts for it. Alan, do you want to go first? Tell us about yourself.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, my name is Alan Murdoch. I'm a creative director, and I work for Greenvine Marketing, and I also run my own business, Murdoch Media Production. Murdoch Media is focused on video and blogging and storytelling, story-driven content. So that's my background. Do you want me to talk about the deck now, or just go to Will?
Well, I tell you, let's hear from Will because Will's background is
Yeah.
really quite different. I can understand immediately why someone like Alan would pick up and go, "Oh, hang on a second, right? That's got Storyteller on the box. I need to have a look at it." Will, what about you?
Yes, I'm a data analyst or tech consultant. I deal a lot with numbers, spreadsheets, databases. What I try to do for companies is try and analyze all that data and try and bring out some useful insights for how they can go and take action, change their business, improve profits. What I found is I can present a load of numbers, a load of charts, but actually sometimes getting them to remember what I've said, getting them to act on what I've done or presented to them is actually really challenging. And so I've actually found that coming at it from more of a story point of view does actually help a lot more with getting people to remember what I've done and action the insights I've got for them.
It's very interesting you say that, Alan. It's the same in your world. You've got to get people to remember what you say and then do something about it.
Absolutely.
So it's actually they're very similar.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think for me, when I look at the deck, one of the things that drew me to it was um, the breadth of story options in terms of the approaches. So I find myself really falling into that kind of set of stories that I like to tell. And when I was looking at the ads for the deck and seeing the breadth of the options that were available, maybe I don't go to, um, you know, kind of a rags to riches story as my first go-to. Maybe I go to Man in a Hole first, or maybe I go to No Easy Way. And so like when I'm thinking about, you know, what would that deck do for me? I've studied storytelling a lot. I've dug into a lot of storytelling. For me, it's that breadth. It's the options that the spread that I get in front of me to rethink the story that's in front of me and to look at it in 10 other ways than that might be my go-to. It gives the client a lot more
Mm.
options, and then we can have a back and forth discussion about where they're at in their story journey, where I might take it, and then how we can collaborate to give it the strength that it needs to be for the audience they're trying to.
I think this is really interesting, Will, as you're listening to this, because Alan's someone who's basically well versed in storytelling techniques, and this is a kind of divergent thinking tool that gives him a load of options to play with. You're coming at it as a data analyst. Was this your kind of first conscious um, journey into, right, I'm going to have to tell a story? Let's see how we do this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concepts that come with data analysis, and in particular, like data visualization, which is making the charts. Concepts that people struggle with, like understanding like the concept of big numbers, like what does 10 billion look like visually, but how do you explain that, and how do you get people to kind of care about this versus anything else they've had? And so I found this sort of subconsciously I was tackling into sort of naturally into data detectives, but more onto like the data zoomer.
Mm.
So I was involved in a project talking about education metrics and talking about literacy rates. and you can talk about how many people in the world are illiterate, but sort of is there kind of like, so what? You almost have to do the zoom in to like one person and tell that story to then actually get people to have a bit of emotion about what the numbers say, give them that context to say, actually, I care about this person, and now I realize that it's not just one person; it's this many people, and this is a real
Mm.
big issue. And now they're almost emotionally invested in the numbers now.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you say that, because you said beforehand you have to get people to remember what you've said, and then you have to get them to do something about it. And memory and motivation, which we're talking about here, these two things, memory and motivation, are both really closely linked to emotion. So we remember stuff with strong emotion attached to it, and emotion makes us do stuff. So this is to me, this is quite an insight when I was writing the deck. Is thinking, I need to talk to people about emotion, and in professional settings, quite often there's this feeling of, well, we shouldn't be really talking about emotions. We should be talking about numbers. But so when you so
So
have you had any pushback, Will, when you've done this? Have you had any kind of reactions where people have gone, oh, this is a strange way of talking about numbers?
I think when people see it, they kind of understand it. I think I've done it before where you've gone the sort of standard approach of what they're used to. Like, these are like our KPIs we're trying to hit, this is that. And then I see the response that it's not getting through, it's not working with them. And at that point, I'll start experimenting with, say, well, how can I actually get them to perform some kind of action? And that's when I think, oh, can I try and make this a bit more relevant to them, a bit more personalized to, say, if they were a customer for this company, how would they feel? What would their journey be like? How could I sell that story to them in that sense? So I generally start with like, but here's the big numbers. It depends on the people I'm working with. But if it doesn't work, yeah, stories are a great place to sort of start experimenting from there.
And Alan, do you find yourself jumping straight into story with your clients, or do you find there's any pushback on that? Do they want to know data as well?
Um, I, I've actually worked with a recent client, Sustainable Food Center. They're a mid-sized nonprofit in Texas that's focused on food access and local farming, small farming, getting away from big agriculture, and bringing sustainable practices back into farming and agriculture. So, a pretty interesting group that has a big challenge ahead of them. The big ag is kind of there. It's like, okay, how much grain can you grow, and then how can we extract that for ingredients and other things? They're really trying to think in a counter kind of way. And the first thing that I did with them was go into two of the cards: audience profile, big, small, inside and outside.
Mm-hmm.
And those cards, so what I did is I interviewed the director of each division. They have about 4 or 5 divisions in their organization. And so I started saying, okay, well, who needs to hear from you, and what do they need to hear, and what's the most important thing that you want them to hear that they might not know already? So that's getting to the inside stories that might have an opportunity
Yeah.
to expand and become revealed. Yeah.
This one, big, small, inside out. It's almost like a diagnostic tool, isn't it, for thinking, yeah, there's lots of stories, lots of places you could tell them. So is it a big story or a small story? Are you telling it inside the organization or outside the organization? And that for me was quite interesting, because a lot of the work I'd done before that had been about people trying to pitch stories outside the organization. But I think the majority of stuff you do in most organizations is within the organization. So, Will, in your case, pretty much everything you're doing is within an organization. Is that right?
Not always. I have done a few like conference ones
Oh,
here
yes.
and there, and sort of internal conferences as well. We had just a couple of weeks ago, so that gave me I had to rethink what I was doing and what I was sharing. But
Mm.
yeah, that card has been certainly like very helpful for getting, I suppose, the tone right, or the right kind of items I need to put into this presentation. I know with an internal conference, these are much more friendly people,
Mm.
almost as close as if they were internal to the stakeholders in the business. So I could show them things a bit more new and fresh that were sort of works in progress to get a few bits of feedback from them. If that was, say, the confidence stage, maybe not so risk free, or risky kind of approach there.
So it's interesting to have those cards in the back of the deck, which are about organizing how and where and when you should tell stories. Because actually, things can go really wrong if you get those bits wrong. Because you're either patronizing somebody, or you're going way above their head, or you're telling them something that they don't need to know. So it's all that sort of stuff about, put your audience first. And what's interesting I found is, so, if you work with extroverts, they seem to be very confident storytellers, and they'll happily stand up and, say anything. But they're often not really thinking about the audience; they're thinking about themselves. And so this idea of, okay, put the audience first before you start thinking about the story, I think it's really good discipline. Something I certainly find very useful discipline for me. So let me just ask you about go-to cards. You've mentioned a few cards already. So Will, you talk about data detectives, and Alan, you talked about Man in a Hole and No Easy Way. You've both been using the deck now for over a year, haven't you? Find that you have a set of kind of go-to cards that you can use, and they'll help you out no matter what you try to do. Alan, do you want to talk first about your go-to cards?
For sure. I think city the dragon in the city is Dragon in the City is a definite go-to card for me. For any organization, small, medium, large, they're in a matrix of all of their suppliers. They're in a matrix of all of their customers. They may have business to business and business to consumer pathways. So and they see threats at all directions. So opportunities as well. So that's a really good one, working with organizations. And yeah, go ahead.
Can I just jump in? I've got a question. I'm curious. When you're using the Dragon and the City to structure a conversation, right? Do you tell them it's about dragons, or do you just keep the dragon undercover? You know it's about a dragon and a city, but you talk about threats and opportunities, and status quo, or do you tell them the story of the dragon?
It depends on the organization. So, for example, with the Sustainable Food Center, one of their big questions is how does the food system work? And so their concept of the city is the food system, and the food system is made up
Yep.
of all these channels and distribution and buyers and sellers and pricing and all that kind of stuff. And so one of the questions was, how can they take food system and make it something that's comprehensible to the audience? So I brought in a little bit of the language of Dragon in the City. Where all these pressures coming from, and how do you make the systems work? Because people have a really difficult time framing what a system is. So it brings it down to a little more down to earth if you use that language or similar language in terms of creating a story. So in some instances, we stepped back and just looked at it from the big analytical picture. In other instances, we stepped forward and said, okay, well, what do these threats look like? What can we name them? And brought in some of that Dragon in the City language. So it's a combination for me.
There's an interesting thing. I've used this technique, the Dragon in the City, with a lot of different clients, and I always name it I always call it the dragon. I say, so where are your dragons? What do they look like? Where are they coming from? Are they threats or opportunities? Yes, of course you can. Will, is that something that is that a card that you've tried where you looked at the Dragon in the City, and do you actually name it as, look, there's a dragon coming for us?
So certainly, yeah, Dragon City was very helpful for me in terms of trying to frame a talk, or trying to start a talk, trying to actually flesh out those scenarios. So I didn't say it was a dragon, but I said, hey, there's this big thing coming called AI, and what do I do as a data analyst? Do I go and retreat? Do I just go and get a job as a plumber? That should be fine.
There's no AI plumber out there, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, not yet. Not yet. Do I go and do what a lot of people do and say that it can't do my job? No, because AI is no good, it can't do my job. Or do I go and actually try and see what it can do, try and fight or try and tame the dragon in a sense? So that was very helpful for, say, setting up like an introductory sort of phase of like, well, this AI thing's came, it looks amazing. What do I do?
Yeah.
What would you do to my audience to try and engage them?
Yeah,
Would you,
but you didn't, with
leave?
that
Would you,
particular audience, you didn't need to tell them it's a dragon. You just need to tell them it's this thing coming towards us.
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
this thing is on
So
the horizon. It's getting better and better, and
yeah, and
look at
we've
what it
got to
can
decide
do.
what to do. But so for you, the dragon in the city was a framing device that you didn't need to call it a dragon. Now it's interesting that it'll depend on the audience, because some audiences will be playful and they'll just go with it and they'll start talking about dragons. I've never had an experience where a client turned around and went, "Don't be stupid. There's no such thing as dragons." Right? So nobody went super literal on me and just told me to stop being stupid. Everyone kind of gets it. And some people are more willing to be playful than others, but everyone gets it, which I think is really interesting, because it is a weird thing. It's a dragon. It's not, and the weird thing as well is one of the things that people say to us is about the design of the box. Well, there's a great big dragon on the box, and that's what visually draws people in the first place. There's a kind of playfulness about the design, which is one of the genius things about the designers. But yeah, so that's interesting. So Dragon in the City is a go-to framing device. I'm going to let you choose each one more go-to card that you would really strongly recommend to a newbie, somebody coming in for the first time, picking up the deck for the first time. Pick a card for them that you would say, look, try this one. Honestly, you won't regret it. Alan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think Pitch Perfect is a really good place for a lot of people to start that are in an environment where they have to go and tell something that is going to have an impact within an organization. So it could be pitching a new client, or it could be like a quarterly review, and they want to frame it up in a more interesting way. The fact that that has 4 points in it, kind of moves them through a story arc. It gives them the fundamentals of a really strong story.
I kind of like that because, as I say, there are 4 stages in that pitch. You talk about the problem, the opportunity, the practical steps, and the promise at the end of it, and you can do one slide per stage. So if you're doing PowerPoint or Keynote presentation, that's it. You've got 4 slides. So you put a call to action at the end and a hook at the beginning. You've got a presentation. And I think, yes, so I would say, yes, you're right. That's one of the cards I regularly point people towards. Will, how about you? Is there, for somebody who's starting for the first time with Storyteller Tactics, give them a card that they should go to first?
I would. Well, the one I started with was Man in the Hole. For me, actually working out a structure of what you should say in a talk wasn't too obvious. I kind of stuck to the old science sort of projects where you would say, this is the experiment I was doing, this is what happened, this is what I do next time. It's a very flat and boring kind of. It's not a story. It's just sort of death by PowerPoint what it comes
Well,
out to be.
it's interesting when you do that. It's literally monotonous. It's monotone. So it's like there's no positive or negative tone. There's no excitement. There's no dejection. There's no relief. There's no anxiety. It's literally like it's a single tone of language. So it's boring because it's monotone. Whereas the Man in a Hole version is, you think you're doing fine. You go, oh no, you fall in a hole. You feel awful. Oh, I can't believe I was so stupid. Right? Then you climb out of the hole to somewhere like better, and you go, right, we won't make that mistake again. Well, that is a roller coaster. And what I find about the Man in the Hole is you just have to explain the idea that you thought you were doing the right thing, but then, and everyone goes, oh yeah. Oh yeah, it's very, very relatable. The fascinating thing about it as well, I don't know if you've experienced this with your Man in a Hole stories, is when you're talking to people about a Man in a Hole story, and you talk about the moment where you realise you've messed up, right? You're sitting there, you open an email, and it's the boss going, "I can't believe you've done this," and you're going, "Oh!" You literally physically feel like you've dropped. Yeah, your body drops like that. And when you remember it and describe it to other people, you go, oh, it felt so bad. And people who you're talking to are also going, oh, everyone's dropping into the hole. So the hole is a metaphor, but it's actually also, it's what your body is doing whilst you're talking. And if you want to know about, so, you get people to remember, get people to act, you have to get a connection with them. And you can't connect in a better way than making them feel something you feel. So yeah. So you found Man in a Hole very useful, and you'd say again, go for it as a first card.
Because for me, it actually taught me that you could talk about things not being right, things that went wrong, how you were feeling at the time, and actually that adds a lot to your story. So, in one of the talks when I was using it, it actually got me to think back to the time that basically I had this sort of triggering point that happened, and it got me to think back to that moment. And it was about 4 in the morning. I was back in Suffolk. Couldn't really sleep too much. I had quite a lot on my mind. There was being half my team was being made redundant at work. We were having trouble trying to get a mortgage. I had a lot of pressures on me, and then I got this notification on my phone, and I see it, and it says private and confidential. And then it's like, then I realize this is the next task I've got to feel. And then I fall deeper into the hole. And I like that kind of metaphor of like people come down with you. I always talk about like you've got to bring the audience into the hole with you, so they feel like this isn't like some superhuman. This is one of us, and this is like actually someone who's hard on their luck. And I always like to relate this back to like Shawshank Redemption. You
Oh
know
yeah.
that the guy's not going to end in prison, but you're hanging on because you know how it can't end here. So you're there, engaged, wanting to know how did you get out of this situation.
So guys, listen. The last thing I wanted to ask you is to speak for a moment to someone from your kind of background. So, Will, someone from a kind of data technology world, Alan, somebody from a comms and communication and brand world, and to say, okay, they're on the fence, they've seen the ads, endless ads. What do they think? Should they be investigating Storyteller Tactics? What would you say? Alan, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think that the deck provides a lot of variety, and it gives people the opportunity. So I'm working on a script right now with a friend of mine, and I think that one of the important things about these cards is that a movie. Let's say somebody buys the deck, and they get the deck, and what is their first step going to be? My recommendation would be take the films or stories that you like and then go through the deck and identify scenes or scenarios that are related to that deck. That gives you a sense of like how other people have used story elements because there's a lot in this tool, and it also will spur your mind to think about ways that you can apply these. If you're writing a film script, there's going to be one of these cards for one or maybe two of these cards for every scene, and so you can move your characters through a lot of different scenarios, and that's true if you're a company, if you're doing blogging and you're doing narrative-based blogging. It's the same if you're doing documentary film. Like, where are these moments coming up, and how can you capitalize on the scenario that the people you're following have found themselves in? That's that story card.
Yeah.
So unpacking the deck and unpacking the stories that are meaningful to you in relation to the deck is, to me, a really great place to start.
The thing as well, which perhaps we don't stress enough when we're talking to people who haven't bought, is there is a Slack community there. And there's about 90,000 people in that Slack community. Probably about 1,000 of them are regularly contributing, regularly chatting. Alan, I know you're a regular chatter on that Slack community.
Yes.
Describe what that's like.
Uh, I see a lot of people come in and they usually have a very particular scenario, and they say, I have a presentation coming up next Thursday. I've just gotten the deck. I downloaded my PDF. The cards are in the mail. What should I do next with this scenario that I'm in? And then people will chip in, people who've been using the deck. They'll say, well, here's 3 ways you could tackle that. Often you're in there as well giving feedback and saying, the one go-to card for that scenario is this particular card. And a lot of people are really helped by that. They get over their first presentation. It breaks the ice and it gets them into that scenario really quickly. It's a great environment to collaborate with other people that do a lot of storytelling.
Will, Will, you were a contributor as well in the Slack. I think that's how we started conversation, wasn't it? It was you went in there and said, "What should I do in this situation?" How did you find the experience of being in that community?
Well, it was amazing because I get hands-on like advice from the author. Like, it couldn't be anything better, really, from someone with that much experience. It was just nice because I was a person just using the deck on my own. I had some ideas, but I wasn't too sure. But it was a nice place to go and say test things out, or how should I go about doing this? Get that advice from people in the community, which is really, really helpful.
I think that the real opportunity for me is to rethink ways that I go about storytelling and to get away from my knee-jerk reactions and to consider every story can be considered through every lens presented by a card. And so sometimes that can be overwhelming, but it also, as you become used to the deck and the story structures, it's really empowering. And that's something that I appreciate about it. It's also a way of getting the story out, getting the story to be a third party in a conversation with the client. So a lot of times the client is, I'm stuck in this thing, and then we can say, okay, well, let's put it on. If we take the card, we take the story structure, and we examine that, it makes it a little bit more objective rather than the particular pain they're feeling right now. And so then we can discuss that pain rather than just try to fight to, get them okay again. We've got a sales problem.
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
you can narrow in on the pain point and try and fix that one thing rather than trying to fix everything at once.
yeah, yeah.
There's a line that we've there's a line we keep hearing from customers, which is quite nice. It's a very English thing to say. Is, oh, they're actually helpful, yeah, or they're actually useful. And I think that's just Will's laughing because it's a very English thing to say about something. English people don't go, oh, they're fantastic, they're brilliant, they're wonderful. They go, no, no, they're actually helpful. They're actually useful. Will, would you say actually useful is a good description?
Yes, very, very actually helpful. I found it very practical. So certainly for someone like me, I would, if you knew me, you would never think of me as like someone who would get up and want to do a talk in front of like hundreds of people. That was definitely not me. I am far into the introvert camp, very far embedded, like most sort of data analysts would be. We have a lot of pressures on ourselves in terms of imposter syndrome. We don't want to generally present our work. If we had to, we just want to. If I had to, it would be get up there, just do the thing, and get out there as soon as possible. For me, it's enabled me to be confident in the work that I was going to share, that it would go down well with that audience. So it's really helped actually start a new path in my career.
That's really good to hear. I had a client. I'll wrap up with a little story. I had a client who I coached for about 6 weeks, and at the end of the 6 weeks, I then left it for another 6 weeks, and I said, "Look, have you seen a bottom line difference now you're telling stories better than you were?" And he said, "I'll be honest, I haven't seen that yet, but when I walk into a room, everyone knows who I am." I thought, okay, that's very, very useful. And that's like reputation. That is respect. That's okay. That's hard to put into numbers, but you know it when you've got it. And guys, listen, thank you so much. Lots of respect to you for sharing your afternoon with me or your morning with me. Thank you again. I'm going to hit stop now, and I'll see you on the Slack for another chat at some point. Any questions, you know where to fire them. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So thank you both very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thanks, Steve.